Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Taste of America series, a series on American spirits, especially whiskies. I shall take you through the basics of whiskey and American whiskey to begin with, and then I shall showcase cocktails from all of these brands with an Indian touch. So let's begin. So whiskey. So what is whiskey? Whiskey gets its name from the Gaelic Ushki Beha, which means water of life. Whiskey can be made anywhere across the world, and it needs to be distilled from grains and aged in oak barrels. The American whiskey industry started in the late 1700s. Did you know George Washington, one of America's founding fathers, was one of the first distillers in America? It all began with grain and especially corn distilling and the emergence of bourbon as a style. But in today's date, America has a plethora of whiskies, like from light whiskey to spirit whiskey to corn whiskey to Tennessee whiskey to rye malt to single malt, and quite a few. The craft distillers are making their own style of whiskies where creativity sets afoot more than regulations. However, I will be speaking of three whiskies that are available in India, and they are ruled by, of course, regulations. Those are Bourbon, Tennessee and Rye Whiskey. Please also remember that most American whiskies are spelled with an E in the spelling. However, it's not a mandate. There are enough examples like the Maker's Mark, which spell their whiskey without an E. Let's begin with bourbon. So bourbon is a category which can be made anywhere across America. However, the heart of bourbon still remains the state of Kentucky. Bourbon needs to be made from at least 51% corn, and then it needs to age in new charred oak barrels. This new charred oak barrels is where the most difference in American whiskies come from as opposed to other whiskies of the world. The new charred oak barrels is what gives the American whiskies its color and that distinctive sweetness. Also, when you buy bourbon whiskies or any other American whiskey, please look for the word straight. The straight word on the bottle of American whiskey indicates that the whiskey has aged for a minimum period of 2 years in oak barrels. So where does bourbon get its name from? It gets its name from the House of Bourbons, a French dynasty. So what is the American connection? So one story goes that the Bourbon County in Kentucky got its name because the Americans were helped by the French, the then King Louis, and as a tribute to him in their war efforts, the county was named after bourbon, and the whiskey may have got its name from there, the Bourbon County in Kentucky, or it could have got its name from the Bourbon Street in New Orleans, which was found by the French much earlier. So you can believe whichever story, but of course bourbon is the key whiskey from America. So how is bourbon drunk? So bourbon can be simply had in cocktails, like many bourbons, and many bourbon cocktails are there. However, some fine bourbons can also be had neat, just like you would do with any other fine spirit, like a fine rum or a fine cognac. The next category is the very famous one called the Tennessee, although most people really ignore the Tennessee on the bottle of Jack Daniels. Jack Daniels is a Tennessee whiskey. So Tennessee whiskey is a subset of bourbon, but just that Tennessee whiskey can only be made in the Tennessee state of the United States. With respect to brands, the two most popular brands are Jack Daniels and George Dickel's, but there are a few more which are emerging or have emerged over the last couple of decades. So what makes Tennessee special or a step ahead of bourbon? I'm not saying that bourbon is better or Tennessee is better, but Tennessee whiskey goes that extra step in terms of process. Tennessee undergoes the Lincoln County process, or the filtration through 10 feet of sugar maple charcoal, and this charcoal filtration makes the Tennessee whiskey more mellower, more lighter than the bourbons, and this is the major difference between a Tennessee and the bourbon. Of course, apart from the provenance, that Tennessee has to come from Tennessee. Also, you will notice that on a lot of bottles, including Jack Daniels, you will see the word sour mash that is used. Sour mash in whiskey making refers to the old batch of whiskey. It's just like sourdough, just to maintain consistency, maintain the pH levels of the entire process. You use the spent grain, which is also called a stillage, from the last batch of bourbon or Tennessee, and you use that and add it to a little bit of the new batch, so that the consistency between batches is maintained, and that is the sour mash. It is practiced practically by most bourbon distillers. Again, Tennessee whiskey is made in various styles for various ways of drinking, right from popular cocktails to, of course, drinking it straight out of the glass neat. Next up on the list is Rye Whiskey, R-Y-E. There is no translation in Hindi or any Indian language as to what rye is. Rye is rye. Rye is a very sturdy grain because it can brave the temperatures of the polar regions. I mean, it can grow, not exactly the poles, but it can grow very well in very cold regions. And apart from that, rye is way spicier than other grains, so which renders a spicier note to the final whiskey. Rye has multiple brands. We've got Sazerac, one of the most renowned brands of rye. Otherwise, we've got Rittenhouse, Whistle Pig. A lot of these companies, including the Woodford Bourbon, also makes rye whiskey. Many of these bourbon guys make rye whiskey, and rye whiskey is now trending in the US. It's coming back. It's bigger, it's bolder, it's spicier. So we'll see what best we can make with rye. The United States is now a melting pot of different spirits, and at the heart of it is the craft distilling industry. One such brand is Tito's right here. It started off as a craft brand way back in the 90s, and now it's a 5 billion worth brand. So we'll try and see and make a cocktail out of this too. So ladies and gentlemen, I hope you know a little more about American spirits than you did before, and I look forward to get you more videos with cocktails and easy recipes so that you can look at these spirits from a very, very different light with an Indian touch. So before I end, I would like to just try and show you as to how do I like my Sazerac rye. A glass, a cube of ice, a big rock of ice, and around 30 ml, and that's it. So for me, I follow the principle of 30 ml is equal to 30 minutes. So at most you can have 60 ml a day, and that helps you drink responsibly. So it's just not about drinking, it's about drink and conversations, and with that you are drinking with friends and family, enjoying the drink, and also respecting the time that this drink took to come to you, and you also stay healthy while you're sipping your dram very responsibly. So guys, responsible drinking is what we advocate completely, and I look forward to seeing you with more videos. So stay tuned for the Taste of America series, and I'll come back soon. Cheers.